Good evening, I'm Eugene Chan and we are on Straight Talk, speaking with Professor Lawrence Lau, the Ralph and Claire Landau Professor of Economics at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. A Stanford and UC Berkeley trained economist, Professor Lau taught at Stanford University for nearly 4 decades and served as the Vice Chancellor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong from 2004 to 2010. He is a renowned expert in economic development, economic growth, and East Asian economies. In fact, he developed the first econometric model of China in 1966. He was a member of the 11th and 12th National Committees of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference from 2008 to 2018, and a member of the Executive Council of Hong Kong from 2009 to 2012. Well, welcome, Professor Lau.
Thank you, Eugene.
Maybe I shall call you Larry, but it's more comfortable.
Yeah.
We are seeing sort of escalating tensions between the US and the rest of the world. Of course, includes China, Europe, and some of the emerging powers. How do you see the current geopolitical landscape shaping the global economic outlook in the next 12 months or even in 5 years? It's a very large question I'm asking you.
Yes, but I think we have to accept the fact that China-US strategic competition is a new normal. It will be a new normal for at least the next few years. Okay, and if you really look at it from the United States point of view, if the US wants to maintain its global hegemony, it cannot allow China to say no without being punished.
Right.
Right, because if China can get away with saying no, other countries will follow suit.
Right.
And the hegemony would be no more very soon. So I think from the US point of view, suppressing China is part of their strategy. It's something that they must do.
Right. So would you say that the next 12 months will be very volatile, or should be even lasting the next 5 years?
No, but however, let me add that there will not be a hot war. Okay.
Right.
I think some of you may be familiar with the book by Graham Allison called The Thucydides Trap.
Right.
You know, and I know Graham back in the 60s, so we've been friends for a long time. And I told him that if in the last century, the former Soviet Union and the United States did not go to war, right, at the time, even though they're ideologically very opposite, I think it's not likely that China and the US will go to war, because any war today will have no winners or losers.
Right.
So I think we don't have to worry about World War III.
Right.
All right.
Okay, that's very reassuring.
Yep.
When you mention about a sort of a hot war, I will ask you, there's also a growing fear of what we call the Cold War or new Cold War or even economic decoupling.
Yes.
Is that inevitable, or can globalization kind of adapt to survive into sort of such a fragmented world?
Well, see, I actually want to say something good about decoupling.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you think about it for a moment, right now it is actually quite risky to have only one supply chain, right? Because one supply chain can be interrupted for many reasons. You know, geopolitics, a pandemic, natural disasters such as earthquake or tsunami. So having 2 or more supply chains is actually a blessing. Right? It makes the world economy much more resilient, number one. But number 2, it also means there's competition, right? So there's American supply chain, there's a Chinese supply chain, and perhaps even a European supply chain. They will compete.
Right.
And so no one would be able to monopolize, you know, and in fact, there will be competition, prices will come down, quality will improve.
Right.
So I think in the longer term, it's not a bad thing.
Right. People are worried that when countries are in conflict. Actually, I read in the news today that actually the tourists to USA actually has dropped as well. I mean, a lot of things are happening as a result of what people perceive. I think today, the reason why we invite Larry here today is a lot of people are concerned, something new, they have never seen this before, and how should we take it? So we need to have as much information as possible. Just now when you said when decoupling might be a good alternative, but will trade and investment flows still continue as what we have known in the past?
Now, you have to think of it this way. Economic globalization actually improves the welfare for everybody.
Right.
Okay. Because, and the simple way to think about it is the following, is that once you have economic globalization, the people in every country has more to choose from. Right? You may not want to import anything, you might not want to export anything, but at least you have choice. Right? So whenever you have more choice, you are automatically better off.
Right.
Right. So that's a very simple idea. Now, if you think of the opposite, the deglobalization, the decoupling, that means everybody will end up with fewer choices.
Right.
Right. So on the whole, they all have to be worse off. All right. So I think deglobalization will lead to a lower level of welfare worldwide. Okay. No question. But there is actually one angle that's very interesting to think about, and that is even under economic globalization, even though every country will be better off, but within each country, there will be losers and winners.
Right.
With the globalization, right? Mm-hmm. So the same is true with deglobalization. Mm-hmm. You know, each country will then create new winners and losers.
So completely new picture altogether.
Exactly.
So bring it back to, say, for Hong Kong. I mean, how do we fit in this this geopolitical context? I mean, our role is sort of a bridge between the East and the West, especially in the financial world. So is our role be shifting in this new era? Can you foresee?
Well, you know, I think Hong Kong still has a substantial role to play, but I think we have to take into account the fact that to the U.S. government, Hong Kong is not going to be distinguished from China.
Right.
We have to accept that fact. We shouldn't have any illusion that they would treat Hong Kong differently from the way they would treat China. All right. So we have to take that. But China actually has been very, very supportive and very helpful to Hong Kong, you know, since it began its economic reform. Right. We could easily say that Hong Kong's prosperity for the last, you know, let's say 4 decades, is very much due to the Chinese economy rising up.
Right.
Right. So I think it is inevitable that in the short term, China-U.S. relationship will not be very good.
No.
Okay. But that also implies that Hong Kong-U.S. relationship will not be very good. Okay. Our CE, our chief secretary, they are all being sanctioned.
Right.
Right. So, so I think, but there's still a lot of room for Hong Kong to play, being the bridge, the link between East and West, right? And in fact, if you really think about it, if I'm a foreigner, not a U.S. citizen, but anywhere in the world, if I want to learn about China, where would I go? I would go to Hong Kong.
Right.
Because even though it's not China, but on the other hand, China is very difficult for a foreigner who doesn't know Chinese, the language, to survive. Right?
Right. So Larry, let's move on to look at maybe look at the greater picture. Is quite reassuring. We won't be having a hot war, but the cold war, decoupling is likely to happen. So look at the tariff. I mean, we have read from the papers and watching the news that the U.S. is raising tariffs on virtually every trading partner, and especially for China. Even for China, it includes everything from electric vehicles, semiconductors, to all consumer products. And of course, recently they have sort of put a pause to the other countries and only given to China. This will change daily. But how damaging is this going to be to the consumers and business worldwide? Because I think what's happening in the world is people are a bit worried. What will happen?
No, it actually will be very damaging in the short term. Okay, let me just give you an example. Someone calculated that in order to make Apple iPhone in the US, it would have to sell for $3,500 or more, right? From right now it's around a little bit less than $1,000. So you can see that it's almost impossible. There would be a transition that would be very painful, right? You know, so I think now, fortunately for China, you know, China has to buy airplanes from Boeing or Airbus, right? Right. If you buy Boeing today, there's a tariff of, you know, the Chinese tariff against American imports of 84%.
As I say today, yes.
Yeah, as of today. No one is going to buy a Boeing in China.
No.
They're going to buy, why not buy an Airbus? You know, same quality, prices comparable. No one would want to pay those kind of.
Right.
So it would be a huge disruption.
Right.
It would be a huge disruption. There are many other examples I won't say, but there will be a disruption.
Right.
But I think that the supply chain will be reconstituted. And I think China can actually undertake what I call import substituting innovation.
Right.
Right. You think about the Huawei cell phone. Right. Huawei actually virtually went out of business. So a cell phone business 5 years ago because it could not buy the chips. Right. But over the years, Huawei and some companies in China managed to develop the chips.
Right.
So Huawei is back in business with a new cell phone.
Right.
So it would take some time, but I think what would happen is that eventually, you know, I think there will be parallel supply chains. Now, in the interim, there will be some pain.
Right.
I don't dispute that.
Right. Larry, let's take a short break now. But viewers, stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back. Professor Lawrence Lau, a leading voice in economics, is with us unpacking the very topical issue of global tariffs and how this is going to affect Hong Kong people. So, Larry, in the first half, you have given us the overview of what will happen after the tariffs are being actioned. There will be short pain, but in your view, in mid to long term, it should be fine. It'll be a new sort of mechanism being constituted. So, would you say tariffs are an effective tool in today's economy? Because, in a way, it's hurting ordinary people through inflation.
Yes.
And could we see a return to the 1970s styles of stagflation, where there's a high inflation, slow growth in the US, and if this trade wars intensify?
I think it is possible. I think that might be one reason that the US has decided to pause the tariff for 90 days, because the impact has been quite negative. Right. So, but I think we cannot be too optimistic about how quickly this trade war will come to an end. Okay, I mean, given that the positions on both China's side and the U.S. side seem to have hardened, right? But I want to go into something that is slightly different, and that is to reassure you that the impact on the Chinese economy of these U.S. tariffs, is not that big.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you look at the U.S. tariff rates, together with the latest edition, it's about 124%. Right. 125%.
Which it's going to be 145 as well.
Yeah. Well, 145 now.
Yes.
Yeah. But that basically means no trade. Okay, because and 145% on one side, 84% on the other side. Basically,
there's no trade.
No trade, right? So we want to say, okay, if there's no trade with the U.S., what's going to happen to the Chinese economy? Okay. Now I want to give you two statistics. One is that Chinese exports to the U.S., exports of goods and services to the U.S. as a percent of Chinese GDP is less than 3% in 2023.
Right.
It's 2.9%. Now, but if you now take into account that China has been importing also from the U.S., so you look at the net, you look at Chinese trade surplus vis-a-vis the U.S. as a percent of Chinese GDP is 1.67%. So it's a very small amount. So even if you take that away, it's, okay, 1.67%. Well, okay, it's still significant because even 1% of GDP is still very significant. But it is not something that that would kill you.
Right. Is that the reason why a motherland has been quite strong in sort of defending our position?
Yes, because I think the cost, because people now actually still have this idea that exports are extremely important for the Chinese economy. But that has really changed over the last 10, 20 years.
Right. But how about, say, to Hong Kong? I mean, we don't have anything to produce.
Yes.
I mean, Hong Kong is still a free port. I mean, how is it going to affect Hong Kong with tariffs?
Well, you see...
Would it be a sort of an indirect sort of effect more so?
It would be quite indirect. And I think the direct effect is small. And as you said, Hong Kong does not manufacture anything. And most of Hong Kong's exports, whatever Hong Kong exports, are re-exports. They are transshipments of things made elsewhere through Hong Kong. Now, and so it's not a large number, but I actually have some sympathy for these people. For example, you have people in Hong Kong, small and medium enterprises, dealing in Chinese medicine. Okay, 長白山人參,
right,
ginseng, yeah. So, and Hong Kong has a useful role to play, and Hong Kong adds some value, right, even though it's not produced here, because Hong Kong certifies the quality and so forth. So those would suffer because they would lose their business, right? Because the Chinese product that they try to ship to the U.S., Hong Kong products will not be subject to tariff, but Chinese products, even shipped to the U.S. via Hong Kong, will be subject to tariff.
Right. So Larry, let's come back more to the viewers now. I'm sure the viewers say, all right, looks like it's not that bad.
No.
So, but for the regular households who still worry about could be a rising cost, you never know. What will you advise them to protect their finances in this volatile environment? Would you be asking to savings, more investment, or diversification? What would you advise them to do?
Oh, I think the thing to think about is that the markets are very volatile today. Okay, so I would say that it's much better to be conservative. Right. Right, because because with the markets being so volatile, if you go in and out, chances are that you lose money rather than make money. So I would say that stay calm, don't do anything drastic. Right. And,
but with the knowledge that it should be all right in the long term, as you've been trying to say. But how about young professionals? Should they be rethinking about their careers with all these geopolitical changes? Because usually people like to have their career overseas. US is a very popular area where you were there for 4 decades. Will any of this change your guidance to them?
I think you asked a perfect question, because I think that the United States is no longer as hospitable to Chinese people as it used to be. Okay, because I've actually know a significant number of Chinese students on student visa who were turned back upon arrival in New York or San Francisco, right? And I think that is so unconscionable because you should either shouldn't have given them a visa
in the first
because
place.
because they have to, I mean, they've undergone so much trouble, so much expense to arrive in America, and then you send them right back. I think that's just wrong.
Right. Right. So we talk about the advice to the public. How about for businesses? I think a lot of businesses have built their long-time supply chains and thinking that globalization will never reverse. But what's your advice to the businesses? I'm sure they're scrambling to adapt. What would you suggest them to do? Would you say?
Well, I think you need to look at new markets.
Okay.
And ASEAN countries are a good market. ASEAN is growing very fast, right? The Belt and Road, and maybe South America, right? Brazil is actually becoming a major trading partner of China, right? So instead of buying American beef, right, you can import beef from Brazil. Right. So I think you need to change.
Right.
Because I think I think the China-U.S. trade is not going to revive strongly anytime soon.
Right.
And that will also affect Hong Kong-U.S. trade.
Right. Larry, you have been an advisor to the governments and also institutions for decades. What would you be saying to the Hong Kong government? Sort of, I would say, sort of mindset or sort of a policy that you advise them in the midst of all these tensions?
Well, I think the Hong Kong government is trying very hard. I mean, like it launched the support for the credit support for the SMEs, but I think it can actually be more proactive.
Okay. Because
this is the time when Hong Kong has the risk of going into recession, right? Because the sentiment has turned very negative.
Exactly.
And so forth, right? So you need to do something positive. And I think that one thing the Hong Kong government can do is to push forward on some of the large infrastructural projects, like the Northern Metropolis project. Now is the time to push.
Right.
Because, and you say, where does the government get the money? You can use bond financing, issue bonds, right?
So it's time to invest now.
Time to do investment.
So it looks like our financial secretary has done the right thing to plan for investment.
Yeah, you should spend more.
Right.
See, and don't worry about deficits.
All right. Not now, anyway.
Yeah, not now, because you want to save the patient first.
Right. Okay. Right. Thank you, Professor, for your valuable insights. And as we have discussed, tariffs and trade wars are more than headlines. They impact our very livelihoods. While uncertainty is rising, with our Lion Rock resilient and support from motherland, Hong Kong is able to ride the storm and we will come out stronger. Until next time, I'm Eugene Chan, and thank you for watching Straight Talk.